Raheem Morris is finally home, but what exactly is the Falcons' plan at quarterback?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, who are helping you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And guys, if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for far too long, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. You may also know me as Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And, of course, I appreciate each and every one of you that is a everydayer of this illustrious podcast that tune in each and every day as your first listen or first watch of the day. And to become an everydayer, all you have to do is follow or subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, we will be continuing our positional reviews of the defense, talking about the interior defensive line, talking about Grady Jarrett's disappointing season, David Onyemata's impressive season, but why the Falcons need to start planning for life after those guys, given some signs of decline and or the depth issues that plague the team at that position all year long. But we're starting off with the reaction to the introductory press conference from Raheem Morris, the new head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. And the most prescient thing and most interesting thing that Raheem said in his introductory presser is, "This is home," right? Referring to Atlanta. And that's great to hear that, you know, you have a coach that's very excited to be here and feeling like, you know, his heart was always in the city. And, you know, generally speaking, you know, Raheem is very engaging when it comes to talking a lot of stuff, and even when he's not really saying anything that's like that compelling, like it's still engaging to listen to. He did talk a little bit about you know, his coordinator hires and what he sees in Zach Robinson and Jimmy Lake, two first-time coordinators, and why he's not necessarily concerned with their lack of experience calling plays at the NFL level in terms of what they can do. And he used kind of the buzzwords with Zach Robinson about what his offense is expected to look like, which is timing, rhythm, balance, playing fast. And again, those aren't necessarily things that are distinct or unique or something when it comes to how most NFL teams want their offense to play. But those are sort of the same sort of buzzwords that I'm sure you could imagine in terms of describing what the Sean McVay offenses have been in LA for the last 7 seasons. And we'll sort of see if Zach Robinson can kind of mirror the success that Sean McVay has had these last couple of years. And with Jimmy Lake, he talked about how they're like-minded. They share the same core beliefs. We did hear that Jimmy Lake will be expected to call the plays. I know that was a question with Raheem Morris. Would he, you know, call the plays on defense? And it does seem like Jimmy Lake will be expected to handle those duties, but you always have, you know, the head coach's ability to handle that in his back pocket. And, you know, another interesting answer that I thought he gave where someone, I can't remember who, asked him sort of what sort of the biggest change for his mindset and his approach to being a head coach that has changed since, you know, his early days in Tampa Bay back in 2009 when he first got that job, and where he is now, you know, 15 years later. And basically his response I thought was pretty funny, where, you know, when he was 32 back in 2009, he was like, he thought he had all the answers. And now at 47, you know, he's much more open to the idea of this being a collaborative process and, you know, taking different ideas from different places within the organization. And that was kind of the through line of that presser, where they talked about sort of how collaborative this sort of thing would be, which, you know, is, I guess, the antithesis of how things might have gone a different way if the Falcons had hired Bill Belichick, where it was just kind of a singular person's vision, you know, great man in history sort of mindset. But, you know, I thought the other thing that was interesting that Raheem talked about, you know, because again, He's very engaging, even when he's not saying a whole lot. And one of the things that he didn't say a whole lot about was the team's plan at quarterback, right? And he talked about how they hadn't really discussed what their plans are at quarterback, and it kind of pours cold water on the notion I think probably a lot of people hoped for and wanted to hear, or maybe have thought was the case, which is the idea that the person who was going to win the job here in Atlanta was going to be the person that won this regime over, or, this organization, I guess you could say, Arthur Blank and Terry Fontenot and Rich McKay and company, Greg Beatles as well, in the sense of, what their plan is at the quarterback position, because that's going to be a big topic of conversation. We've talked about this a number of times over the last few weeks and months, which is sort of the two biggest issues that this team is going to have to deal with, is the head coach and the quarterback. And now that they got the head coach seemingly resolved, now it's up to the quarterback. And that's going to be a big topic conversation here on this daily podcast for the next, few months. But, one of the things that I've said about how things work in the NFL for the last couple of years, and I think this is just more evidence that this is how it works in the NFL. It's like teams make it up as they go along. I think there's this myth that fans have that like there's some grand scheme and grand plans, and like that's just not how this business works. And when you sit down and think about it for more than 5 seconds, like you understand, like, what possibly could Raheem Morris have pitched to these guys, right? Like he can't sit here and say like, oh, we're going to go sign this guy in free agency, because who knows if that guy's going to reach free agent. Like if he was like, oh, we're going to get Kirk Cousins because, I worked with Kirk, a decade or more ago in Washington, and I know he'd be a great fit in Zach Robinson's offense. But then, we get a couple of weeks down the road, a month from now, and the Vikings re-sign Kirk Cousins. And so that plan goes out the window, right? You can't sit there and say, oh, we're going to trade for Justin Fields. And then when you call up the Bears and they say like, we want your first round pick or whatever, again, I'm just spitballing here just to make the point. Then all of a sudden you're like, well, we're willing to give you like our third, but like, and then you can't come to an agreement on a trade, right? So you can't really push that, nor can you sit there and say, well, we're going to draft this guy, right? Because you haven't even begun the process of evaluating these quarterbacks, especially if you're a coach at this point in time. Like Raheem Morris, when he's interviewing for the Falcons, like he's focused on, game planning for the Detroit Lions or coming off of that game plan. He hasn't even begun his process of evaluating quarterbacks, and Zach Robinson hasn't done that. And, the scouts in the building have, right? And Terry Fontenot may have an inkling on this quarterback, but like he'd be more inclined to make that pitch for which quarterback he likes more so than Raheem Morris. So, that's going to be a process that's going to unfold. I've been asked numerous times over the last several weeks, what do I think the Falcons going to do at quarterback? And my response every time is like, I have no idea, guys. We're going to find out together. And that's part of the journey that we're going to go on this offseason. And we'll have plenty of conversations. And my duty here, as I often say, like you can control what you can control. I can't control who that next quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons is going to be. Only thing I can control is, giving you the information that will at least allow you guys to have the most informed info on whoever that quarterback is between now and when that decision is made. And so that's what we will be focusing on this podcast for the next, month or two. When it comes to that, we'll look at a lot of free agents. We'll look at a lot of trade options. We'll look at some draft options, just like the Falcons will be looking at all of those options and exploring those options in that period of time. And we'll see what they come up with in that time. But those are my big thoughts on the Raheem Morris presser. I'm curious if you guys had any other takeaways, any other nuggets that stood out to you that, of course, leave a comment on what stood out to you. Hit me up in the Locked On Falcons Discord. In terms of that, you want to send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com. However you want to provide that feedback, hit me up on joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons as another way to do so. So I'll be curious to hear what your guys' thoughts on the introductory presser were, but we'll continue today's Locked On Falcons talking about the defensive line position. And we'll talk quite a bit about Grady Jarrett and whether or not he's on the decline, and do the Falcons need to start planning for life after Grady Jarrett this offseason. And we'll get into all of that, guys, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So it is the start of a new year, and this is the time where every small business owner is asking themselves the same question: what's the one move I can make that's going to take my business to the next level in 2024? Of course, the Falcons are hoping that one move starts with Raheem Morris, and that continues with the quarterback conversation. But unfortunately, the Falcons don't have a place like LinkedIn Jobs that can make it easy for you to find that right person to lead your team and take them to that level in 2024, which is that quarterback. But LinkedIn Jobs, isn't just any old job board, right? They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which is why they're the best place to go to if you need to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many qualified candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. It's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus their leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs is going to help you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And if you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring, whether it's the best seat on the couch, the best snack, the best drink, or placing some super bets. And FanDuel has so many ways for you to get a W at the end of this season, like their prop bets, right? You can bet on Christian McCaffrey getting 35 plus rushing yards in each half, right? Or Travis Kelce getting 25 plus receiving yards in each half. Or, if you want to take those are surer bets based off of the FanDuel odds. But if you want to get a little bit more money on your win this year, maybe you want to take more of a long shot, like Brandon Ayuk, 30 plus yards receiving in each half. Rashee Rice, 30 plus yards receiving in each half. However you want to play it, FanDuel has so many ways to bet. And if you join today, new customers, you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So continuing today's Locked On Falcons, want to talk about the defensive line. But before we get there, I do want to plug the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel here on YouTube, the first of its kind, giving you the biggest stories across all the leagues, across the world. And if you're looking for more local flavor, check out Locked On Sports Atlanta's 24/7 streaming channel to get the latest updates on the Falcons, Hawks, Bulldogs, Braves, so much more. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, the defensive line, we had very high hopes for this unit because of the addition of David Onyemata. The motto was, we got to get Grady some help. We got him that help this offseason. David Onyemata had a very good season, right? But unfortunately for the Falcons, age and injuries kind of reared their ugly head, as they often do in the NFL. I think Onyemata played really well, had a better season than Grady Jarrett did, right? We saw Grady Jarrett go down with a season-ending injury in week 7, that ACL tear. We saw the turf monster get David Onyemata, that New York Jets turf monster that so much derailed this Falcon season. Will be the underrated narrative of the 2023 year, which is that Jets turf monster really sort of derailed them things at the end of the season in that week 13 Jets game. And Onyemata wasn't the same after that point in terms of his ability to be an impactful D tackle down the stretch. And so, I think the goal for the Falcons is to get younger here, right? Both Onyemata, both Grady Jarrett are going to be 31 when next season starts. We know that depth was a problem throughout this entire season, right? They had a revolving door of different D tackles trying to find that right combination to be the guys that could spell Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata. And over the course of the season, I think you probably wound up settling on LaCale London. Ryan Pace strikes again. Taquan Graham, I thought, played better down the stretch than he did at the beginning of the year. Kentavious Street, before injuries kind of sidelined him after that midseason trade, had about 5 solid games where he made some impactful plays. So I think over the course of the season, you did find some options in terms of better depth than you had at the beginning of the year. But unfortunately, that's still going to be something I think the Falcons are going to have to work on this offseason. Now, more on that later, but let's sort of circle back to Grady Jarrett, right? And I know a couple of off seasons ago, there was people talking about, are they going to trade Grady Jarrett? And I know this offseason, I've already heard the sort of people talking about, are they going to cut Grady Jarrett? I would be shocked if the Falcons moved off of Grady Jarrett this offseason. But I will say that similar to the conversation we might be having about Jake Matthews, and similar to the conversation we should have probably had about Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, is that the Falcons need to start planning for life after Grady Jarrett. Right? Life after Matt Ryan, life after Julio, life after Jake Matthews. And I think you can argue that the current predicament, if that's what you want to use for the Falcons' current situation, is that they didn't do a great job planning for life after Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. And that's why they're in this current predicament where we're looking at quarterback, we're looking at wide receiver as sort of key needs. And we may be having that same conversation about left tackle and D tackle in a year or two down the road. So I think it would be a great opportunity this offseason with Jake and Grady to not fall into that same sort of trap, mistake, whatever you want to call it, again, and start that plan now as opposed to punting that into the future. But I say all that to sort of say I don't think Grady is going anywhere. I don't think Grady should go anywhere. Obviously I don't think Grady had the type of season that we thought he was going to have, right? Even when he was healthy in the first half of the year, like it was kind of a disappointing year because he wasn't bad by any means, but I think the expectations were, I know I can only speak for myself. I'm curious if you guys had different expectations that we were going to see, some of the best that we've seen of Grady Jarrett this year because of all the help that we put around him. And that didn't necessarily come to fruition. It was just kind of a ho-hum year for Grady Jarrett. Now, for most D tackles in the NFL, it would have been a good season, but for Grady Jarrett and what we have seen from him over the last, 3 to 5 years, like, you can argue it's probably his worst season over the last 3 to 5 years. Right. And then you wonder, okay, now that he's at his age and he's coming off this ACL tear, what should the expectations be in 2024? Is it going to be more of the same? Is it going to be less? Or is he going to get bounced back? Again, those are questions that we won't really know the answer until 10 months from now. Or no, 7 months from now. I can't do math. And so I think that's kind of the root of why people are like, hey, maybe it's a good time to move on from him. But, again, I don't think the Falcons should be looking to move on from him until they're ready to do so. That's kind of the point I'm trying to get at. And I don't think the Falcons are ready to do so. Now, maybe they will be ready in 2025, but I don't think we're there yet in 2024. So I think a similar conversation can be had about David Onyemata when we signed him last offseason and we signed him to a 3-year contract, but it was basically really a 2-year contract, and then we'll see. So this upcoming season is the second year of that, and then we'll sort of see. And so we'll have to sort of see where we're at with David Onyemata after this season, if we're having that conversation more in earnest of, okay, maybe it's time, because Father Time is undefeated. Maybe, that day is coming. We know that day is coming. It's just a question of when that day is coming. Could it be in 2025? Could it be in 2026? Who knows at this point in time? We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But I think in terms of planning for the future, it will be smart for the Falcons to start doing that now as opposed to waiting. And right after we talk about the primary needs at quarterback, at edge, at wide receiver as sort of their top 3 issues that they need to address, their most pressing issues that they need to resolve this offseason, right? D tackle is not that pressing because you do have Grady Jarrett, you do have Onyemata, you do have players like TQ Graham and LaCale London that give you some value on the bench. But like offensive tackle, D tackle, are positions or those sort of next tier of needs after those top 3, where you would feel better about the team addressing at some point this offseason, especially in the draft, as part of that plan for the long-term future of this team. So we're not in a predicament being like, oh my God, our left tackle position or our D tackle group is garbage, or whatever word you want to use, because we didn't start planning for that that eventuality sooner versus later. So we'll discuss more of that, future for this position group, talking more about sort of the options and directions the Falcons can go in free agency, in the draft. And, personally, I think free agency is a great opportunity to maybe get that nose tackle that if the Falcons are going, moving in that 3-4 direction under Raheem Morris and Jimmy Lake, that would be a good opportunity. And that draft pick could be more of the sort of long-term Grady Jarrett heir apparent in terms of building towards the future. And we'll break that down as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Now, DoorDash is going to be crucial for your watch party this weekend, whether you're looking to order pizza, wings, soda, burgers, nachos, chips, dip, all that you crave. And maybe you have all that thing covered and all you just need is, oh man, I just forgot the buns. And so DoorDash has got you. You can kick back and watch stress-free before kickoff. And DoorDash has those unbeatable deals on everything you can score this season, whether it's groceries, restaurant, retail, and more. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. Just download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCK23. Subject to change. Terms apply. Again, that's 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCK23, subject to change, terms apply. Don't forget to use that code LOCKED23, LOCKED 23 for 50% off up to $18 value when you use your first order on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more, subject to change, terms apply. And passion, drive, and patience is what's going to bring home that winning trophy for either the Chiefs or 49ers this coming Sunday. But it's also the things that are going to keep your ride or die alive, right? That's eBay Motors. It's got you covered when it comes to all those things, whether you're looking to maintain your vehicle or just level it up to that peak performance, right? Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, more. Whatever you're into, whether it's speed, power, style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, baby. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into an MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers. So when we talk about this upcoming offseason, both Albert Huggins and Kentavious Street are free agents. Since both of those guys are Ryan Nielsen guys, Huggins from the Saints, Street from NC State and whatnot. I'm not expecting the Falcons to bring those guys back. I think they're valuable depth pieces, but I think between Jarrett, Onyemata, TQ Graham, LaCale London that are under contract, this is a contract year for TQ. I think you have enough depth. You just need to add to it, right? I think this is a prime opportunity for this new regime under Raheem Morris and Jimmy Lake to kind of bring in their vision for the D-line, right? We had Nielsen's vision last year, and now it's the Lake vision, right? And I think that applies to both free agency and the draft, right? Now, the Falcons are moving more towards that 3-4, obviously adding that sort of nose tackle, which was something that was sorely missing this year on the Falcons defense. They kind of were relying on LaCale London, and then towards the end of the season, it was Huggins that was kind of getting that role. And they just, outside of London for like a handful of games this year, they really didn't get that value in terms of that nose tackle, right? That was what Eddie Goldman was supposed to do until he decided to abruptly retire for like the 15th time this past summer. But, I don't love the idea of drafting a nose tackle. I just, generally speaking, drafting 2-down players, like, sure, if you're going to draft that guy in like the 6th or 7th round, okay. But using anything prior to that for like a 2-down player, to me, philosophically, I'm just not a huge fan of that. And I also always think there's always available options in free agency, because that's what happens when teams draft those 2-down players. They draft these guys, in the mid rounds. They exhaust them on the rookie contract, and then they just become journeyman nose tackles and play on like 6 teams over the next 6 years. And you can just always find those guys available. And then that's why draft those guys when they're always available? You can get the finished product rather than trying to develop that product for somebody else to reap the benefits of. Right. And so, I look at a player like Greg Gaines, right, who played for Jimmy Lake at Washington, played for Raheem Morris with the Rams, as like a perfect example, right? He's a free agent coming off a okay season with the Bucks. And he would be, sort of an ideally cheap option, I think. But you also have, other ex-Rams like Sebastian Joseph-Day that is a free agent after a couple of years with the Chargers. A'Shawn Robinson's not really a nose tackle, but he also has experience with the Rams. These are perfectly solid, depth pieces that if they're your 3rd or 4th guy in your interior D-line rotation, I think that would be a big upgrade from what the Falcons had this past year. But if you're looking for other nose tackle types, specifically Josh Tupou from the Bengals, DJ Reader from the Bengals, Raekwon Davis from the Dolphins, Tier Tart from the Texans, Mike Purcell from the Broncos, Lecky Fotu from the Cardinals, there are plenty of options available that you can get probably for relatively cheap, right? A 1-year, $2 million deal or something along those lines, and go and do that rather than drafting one of those guys. So, I feel like you can find that solution in March, that you don't necessarily have to feel compelled to quote unquote reach on that guy in April. But, I think when we do get to April and the draft, that should be more reserved for that 3-down player that can be the Grady Jarrett era parent, the David Onyemata era parent, that guy that can be an impactful player on all 3 downs. And again, you can probably afford to take a little bit more of a developmental project in that regard. Again, someone maybe in the 3rd or 4th round, at that point. That seems to me, again, at this point in time in the offseason, we'll see how it develops and evolves over the coming months and weeks. But, that seems to be kind of the sweet spot, for where I would love to find that sort of option where you can still get a valuable, potential 3-down player that has some upside, but you don't necessarily, it doesn't feel like it's too big a swing, right? Like you're it's that sweet spot if you follow what I'm saying, in terms of, like, I don't necessarily have to use a premium draft pick where I have maybe some other pressing issues like quarterback, like a receiver, like edge rusher, but I can still get a good player in the 3rd or 4th round. And I haven't done my homework on this D tackle class in this upcoming draft. I've only really watched a couple of these guys, jer'zhan Newton of Illinois, a couple of guys at the Senior Bowl this past week. But there are a couple of guys that I know, at least going into this season back in August, when people were putting out their sort of preseason rankings and doing their summer scouting and whatnot, that there were a couple of guys that were being billed as like 1st-round picks, top 50 picks then, that are not getting that same love, and at least based off of recent mock drafts, are seen as sort of 3rd and 4th round guys. And the 2 names that kind of jump out to me are Leonard Taylor out of Miami and Mason Smith out of LSU. And I haven't watched their film yet, and I might watch their film and be like, oh, this is why they're not very good. This is why they're not getting that sort of love anymore. But those are kind of the guys that, at least going into this process, before I've actually sat down and studied this position group, those are the guys that I have my eyes on, of being like, okay, these guys at one point were seen as those high upside guys that could have been top 15, top 32 picks. And now that you're going to be able to, steal them, so to speak, air quotes, in the 3rd or 4th round. And that's kind of what I'm thinking about. Okay, that might be because there may be a little bit more of a project, right? But, you have a year or 2 to develop those guys behind Grady, Jarrett, behind David Onyemata, the sort of the perfect mentors for those guys, and maybe they have that long-term upside. So again, I haven't studied them. I'm just basing that entirely off of where I saw those guys ranked in August versus where I see those guys ranked today. And it's like, that's kind of where my attitude is up. But again, this will be like so many other positions where I think the Falcons have a lot of needs at this spot, or they have a lot of wants. So let's rephrase that. We want to get a younger heir apparent to Grady Jarrett. I don't know if it's necessarily a dire need, like the season is doomed without it, but it's one of those positions where it would be nice to sort of get that stash player that you don't necessarily need him to be a difference maker in year 1, but in years 2 and 3, maybe he can grow into that Grady Jarrett type of replacement, that David Onyemata replacement, and especially those 2 guys, and Taylor and Smith, that may have that upside to be that impactful player. So we'll see what happens, but we'll just sort of watch how this offseason plays out. Tomorrow we'll be talking about the linebacker group, sort of, Caden Ellis, Troy Anderson. Do they fit in the Raheem Morris, Jimmy Lake scheme as well as they fit in the Ryan Nielsen type of scheme? That will probably be the topic that we'll discuss on tomorrow's episode. So continue to make us your first listen, guys. Appreciate you tuning in. We'll be back with more tomorrow. Check out Locked On NFL, Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Sports Today, Locked On 49ers, Locked On Chiefs for more coverage of the big game this weekend. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every